I can't. Can you hear me? Very good. I can't see anything, but also I can't see any more people coming, so we're gonna start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Ewelina Wilkosz, and if you want to comment or ask me anything after the presentation or during the presentation, although I won't be checking that during the presentation, here's my Twitter and GitHub handle. It's my name and surname without a space. So that one should be easy. And I work as a continuous integration, continuous delivery consultant in a small Scandinavian-based company. And my first task when I joined the company was related to Jenkins, and it was almost 3 years ago. And since then, I'm stuck with Jenkins. So I'm going to talk about Jenkins. Specifically about Jenkins configuration as code. And yeah, I'll explain what it is very soon. But before we start, for those of you who are not familiar with the Slido yet, there is a page where you can, there is a service that you can use to ask questions. And I hope at the end of the presentations we'll have a few minutes to answer those questions. So you just go to slido.com and you use the GeeCON 2019 as a way to get to the right room. Then you have to choose the right room. I think there is a few rooms, and yeah, room 4 is the one we're in. So we're gonna have a look at the questions at the end of the presentation. So what am I gonna talk about today specifically? First, I'll explain what is JCask, why we decide to try, who are we, and how does it work. Then we'll move to a short demo where I will pray for my Docker container to work properly. I'm using Docker, so I'll very briefly explain the Docker setup I have for that demo, but Docker is not a requirement for configuration as code. You can also use it in traditionally installed Jenkins. And at the end of this presentation, I'd like to spend a few minutes to talk about open source contributing, because Jenkins configuration as code is my first open source project I have joined, and I enjoyed the adventure a lot. So I'd like to encourage those of you who haven't tried yet to maybe try. So JCask. This is a quote from the official documentation at jenkins.io. Jenkins can be installed through native system packages, Docker, or run standalone by any machine with Java runtime environment installed, which makes it present at various platforms and a very popular tool. But for years, it required manual configuration. And by manual configuration, I mean that. And this is actually quite short. So this is one of the sub-pages. If you're managing Jenkins and you go to your Jenkins webpage and you click on Manage Jenkins, then you get a sub-page with the number of sections you can configure, like system configuration, security, tools, plugins. And this specific page, Configure System, it can be very, very long. It depends on the number of plugins you have installed. So it's nice and easy, but if you have to fix your Jenkins because your hard drive crashed, or if you want to have a new Jenkins that is very similar or exactly the same one you have already, every time you have to go through this setup wizard first and then to configure all the things under Manage Jenkins that you need to have your Jenkins working the way you want it. And yeah, when I started working with Jenkins at a customer, I remember I was really scared and I was taking screenshots of my Jenkins configuration or my job configuration every time I wanted to change something, because there is no go back button or revert a change there. You change something in the UI and well, it happened, and you have to remember what was there before if you want to have a possibility to go back to the previous state, or you have to take a screenshot. So I had a huge library of screenshots. And it worked, but I think most of you would agree that it's not the most practical solution. So that's how the idea of configuration as code plugin came. So the plugin, might have not mentioned that yet. Configuration as code is a Jenkins plugin, and yeah, I'll explain later. So the plugin has been designed as an opinionated way to configure Jenkins based on human-readable declarative configuration files. And that's the last quote I'm presenting today. And let's dive into details what it really means. But before that, well, it's 2019, and everything is as code. So it's actually quite poor if a tool that is so widely used does not allow to be fully configured as code. We maintain our infrastructure, environment, architecture, CI/CD, whatever you have in mind when you think about it. Most of the things you can configure and maintain as code. And now it seems that Jenkins can be also fully, or almost fully, configured as code too. So, of course, it's not that I was taking screenshots and then I had an idea of configuration as code for Jenkins. As a first person in the world, people were trying that before. And the part for jobs and your pipelines to be handled as code is already present for quite a long time. So job DSL, for example, freestyle jobs is a pretty mature project. Jenkins files for pipelines, Jenkins pipelines are becoming the leading one, or maybe I'm actually not sure if the leading one, but Jenkins files are being seen as the way to go when you want to create your build process. And it's out there, and it's not part of the configuration as code plugin, but it will cooperate with configuration as code plugin. Configuration as code is designed to handle the actual Jenkins configuration, the build server, not your jobs. Post-initialization Groovy scripts is a solution that I was using before the configuration as code came to life, and it works nice. I like it. There is a specific folder on your Jenkins home, in your Jenkins home folder. I think it's called like initd or something like that. Yeah, it has init.d in the name. That's for sure. I remember. Anyway, you have to write a Groovy script to configure whatever you want to configure, and that way you can configure most of the Jenkins core part and most of the plugins. But it requires you to know the language. It's Groovy. It's not crazy difficult. But still, if you just want to maintain your Jenkins, you're not a software developer, this is a bit challenging. And also, if you want to configure a plugin with Groovy scripts, you have to do a little bit of digging, go to the plugin source code, find out what's the name of the descriptor, what are the methods you can use with the descriptor. So it doesn't work great for everyone. And the biggest problem I had with Groovy init scripts is the fact that they are, as the name says, run during the initialization of Jenkins. So every time you make a change in your configuration or in your script, you have to restart your Jenkins, which is not a solution welcomed warmly, but by many. Well, a lot of people try to use XMLs as a way to handle and maintain configuration of Jenkins as code because it's already there. When you configure your Jenkins, configuration is being stored in XML files. So you can always keep your XML file in some version control system, for example, Git, and make a change, and if you don't like it, bring back the XML from the previous version. But it's not very readable, it's not something you can edit by hand, so it's not also the nicest solution to use. And there is a Jenkins as code reference project started by my company that was relying on those init Groovy scripts. And I liked it. It made my work at my customer much easier. But despite me loving the project, I also felt that it had some pains. And configuration as code plugin is a way of solving those pains. So I just want to briefly mention who are the people that started this initiative. Andrei, Alexandra were the one that were authors of Jenkins' code reference, the GroovyScript project. Mes and me, we're all colleagues from the same company called Pragma. So we started working on a plugin. I think we forked the repository that belonged to Koske. And I really don't remember how it was, if it was us writing to him or him noticing that we forked it. We ended up talking with CloudBees about what we want to do, why we want to do, and what's our vision. And it was really great to see that they had exactly the same vision. And two developers then from CloudBees, Oleg and Nikola, decided to join the project. So some people from Pragma and some people from CloudBees were together working on making the solution that we hoped would become the solution. So something that can actually spread around the world and be usable. Yeah, so we were a small team at the beginning, and we had our Git repository, and we were very relaxed. So those comments, those are not comments that I had to really look for. They were very common. So Nikola broke CI again, so he's gonna first push to master to fix it. Or CI was failing all the time for some weird reason and works on a machine, so we were pushing. And it worked for a second, but Jenkins configuration as code is now a community project. And there is a big group of people involved in developing it. I'm not as involved as I was at the beginning, so I kind of jump in on Gitter that we use for communication every now and then, and there is 100 of messages that I have to read, and there is a crazy amount of releases coming out very often. And I'm telling you all that because I really appreciate, I really like the way the project grew, and I now can see that there is a lot of people that are constantly involved, and that makes me believe that the project will be developed and already became the configuration as code solution for Jenkins. So how does it work? That was a history. To configure Jenkins as code, you need to prepare your configuration file. And you can already see that the configuration file is in the YAML format. You have to have configuration as code plugin installed on your Jenkins and let the configuration as code plugin know where the configuration file is. And I'm going to show you how to do it when I will explain the setup I have for my demo. And yeah, most of the sections under Manage Jenkins, you can configure using those, similar to that one configuration file. So configure system, configure global security, configure credentials, tool configuration, that can all be handled by JCASC plugin. Manage plugins, unfortunately not. The update center that is being used by Jenkins has some issues, which makes it very tricky for us to provide the reliable plugin management within the plugin. I know there is some work ongoing to modernize it, so I hope that in the future the configuration as code will be able to manage plugins too. For now, the plugins have to be handled separately. Again, if you're using Docker, there is already a way to manage your plugins as code too, and I will also show you that. So you have a configuration file, you have JCASC installed, few seconds, and your configuration should be applied on your existing Jenkins or your fresh new Jenkins. And why do I actually believe that it makes sense to use it, and why do I want to talk about it to you? I think there is a lot of benefits, and the fact that I could stop taking screenshots is of course one of them. But yeah, we have safety. So if you have your configuration in a configuration file and your system goes down for whatever reason, you should be able to restore your system and to have it up and running, well, depending on your setup, but it can be seconds, it can be minutes, it can be, well, up to an hour. So it gives you some safety. Traceability, of course, if you keep your configuration file in some version control system, and yeah, Git the most popular, then you can always see and check who made the change, and if your Jenkins starts behaving weird, you can have a look at what happened with the configuration file. You can see who to blame. Now, it's not really about blaming, but if something is not working or working weird, you can always talk to this person and figure out what was the intention. And either you understand the intention or you just change the configuration file. Speed, and now the plugin will not make Jenkins faster, but it will help you to spin up Jenkins masters much faster. It's easy to use, I believe, and it's very easy to reuse because, as I mentioned, you may want to have a number of Jenkins instances that are exactly the same as one of them. So you just copy the solution from the configuration file, or you copy the whole configuration file, so you can very, very easily scale. And yeah, why did we go with YAML? We wanted structured content. We wanted something that will not be language-centric, so doesn't require you to know any specific language, as simple as possible. In my opinion, YAML files are very readable, and, well, you can put comments in them, so you can start documenting your configuration file in the configuration file. And, I moved to Denmark, and I got my laptop with Danish keyboard, and it took me months to figure out how to make curly brackets. And then I was supposed to get a new laptop, and I was used to Danish keyboard, but for some reason, it came with the Swedish keyboard, and there was the whole process all over again. So it's not really that important, but it was actually a pain for me to work with JSON files. So I welcomed the YAML idea warmly. There is only one trick with YAML files, and I always mess it up when I copy from the page or the Git to my configuration file. You have to be careful with indentations. So I'm not going to copy anything today, but yeah, indentation matters in YAML files, so I warned you. Yeah. In order to make the solution popular, and we wanted to make it popular not because we wanted fame or something, but you know, if you have a lot of different solutions that are supposed to provide the same thing, none of them will work really well. If we have one solution where a lot of people is involved into developing it, I think it gives a much more chance of a tool that actually answers needs of most of us. So in order to make it the tool that people will look at, we wanted to configure all initial Jenkins setup from the start. No hands-on keyboard, no click on UI should give you a fully working Jenkins master with jobs. So we support job DSL plugin, and you can create your jobs also together and keep the configuration of your jobs together with your configuration files. And when you spin up your new Jenkins from scratch, it will have your jobs. And of course, you have to put your hands on keyboard at some point because you need to prepare your configuration files. And there might be some clicking happening, but the general concept, I guess you understand. And also, with this all initial setup, the support for all the plugins is quite an important requirement. And there is, I really don't follow the number, but there is between 1,500 and 2,000 Jenkins plugins right now. And it's impossible. Maybe it is possible, but it doesn't really make sense to write a separate piece of code to support each of the plugins. So the most tricky part with the plugin was to avoid writing this glue code for each plugin. And we've decided that we're going to rely on some conventions. I'll briefly mention those, but the conventions we expect to be followed by plugin maintainers are not something that we developed, we invented. Those are the rules that most of the modern plugins are following, so many of the plugins were supported out of the box. Some require very minor changes, and I managed to fix some, not being a very experienced Java developer. Some require major changes or rewriting. But since the plugin is gaining popularity, people are just jumping in and fixing plugins, and it's really nice to see how fast it's happening. And the documentation and validation tools are also automatically generated. So So if there is a nice documentation for the plugin that you want to configure, it will be nicely documented in the configuration as code documentation that I will show. So the plugin takes a live Jenkins master, and by that I mean each one of you who have Jenkins in a specific version, and different version differs with what you can configure. Usually those are minor differences. And then you have your plugins in some versions. So based on that, the plugin builds the data model, and the data model is driving the YAML parser and is used to generate the documentation and the schema validator. Those requirements, those design rules that need to be followed in order for any plugin to be compliant with configuration as code. JCask relies on data binding mechanism, and the components that directly parse the input from your configuration form. If you take each field by one, and you change the name of the variable from the form because it's different in the class, then it's going to work. There are nicer ways to do it, and I'm not going to go into details, but there is a documentation on configuration as code plugin page that you can check if you want to fix your plugins or contribute to any plugin. And I'm going to for sure share the link to this slide deck on my Twitter, but I'm pretty sure also the conference organizers will have a way of distributing slides with you, for you. So yeah, time to do some demo. I mentioned that I use Docker for my Jenkins, and I hope it's big enough. So I have a Docker file where I describe how I want my container to be built, and I'm actually not sure if this is the latest LTS. They are releasing LTS versions every few weeks now. I copy the plugins txt, that's just the name doesn't matter, but you need a text file with a list of the plugins and the versions of the plugins you want to have installed on your Jenkins. You can use latest, how I have done for my example, but it makes sense to actually keep the track of which versions of the plugins you want to use. So yeah, for example, you can do it like that. And yesterday, that was the latest version of configuration as code plugin. So back to Docker file. I made sure that the file is available in the container. I disabled the setup wizard because when I spin up a new Jenkins, I just want it to be ready without me clicking through anything. And then I ran the install plugins sh script that is part of the Jenkins Docker image that consumes this text file with the list of plugins and pre-installs them before Jenkins starts. And then I use the Docker compose file to start up my Jenkins. So I build a container based on the Docker file that I just showed you. I do some port forwarding. I map the location of my configuration files. So this is a repository that also is publicly available. It's a very simple, basic setup, but if you want to try, it may inspire you a little. So in that repository, I have cask configs folder where I have some configuration files, and I need to make it also available from within the container. So I map the location of the folder with configuration files to /var/jenkins-conf on the container. And then when I was showing you the slide where there was JCask logo in the middle and there was a configuration file on one side and magically configured Jenkins on the other side, I told you that you have to tell the plugin where the configuration file is. And you use environment variable, cask Jenkins config, to do that. So I set up the environment variable. I configure it to point to the location in a container where I previously mapped the location of the folder with configuration files on my actual machine. So that's the bare minimum. And the configuration files, I have few configuration files. You can have everything in one configuration file, depending on how and why you want to maintain it. So I have one for configuring jobs, And you can just provide a URL to your DSL script. You can keep the DSL script the way I do it, together with configuration files. And you can just put your DSL scripts directly in the configuration file. And that's a very simple job, of course. So it doesn't look that bad, but it's better to have it separately. I mean, I believe it's easier to maintain. Some basic Jenkins configuration, some dummy credentials that will be created, some shared library for pipelines and things like that. So that's just a very, very basic Jenkins configuration. And to start it, I just run. So I have my Jenkins pre-built, and it was, run before because I wanted to make sure that, ignore that. That it's going to work. If you don't have Jenkins image pre-downloaded, if you don't have plugins pre-installed, depending on your network connection, it may take a minute or a few minutes to have it up and running from scratch. But Jenkins is fully up and running. Says here. So let's have a look at this Jenkins. So it's up. If you have your configuration files, it's really just one command and your Jenkins is up. I also have some dummy jobs from configure the Groovy script, or the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the job created by this part. And then if I want to change the configuration, I just change something in a configuration file. So let's say I change the system message. I save it. And then there are two ways. You can go to Manage Jenkins, and once you have your configuration as code plugin installed, somewhere at the bottom you'll find the configuration as code, where you can reload existing configuration. And then if we go back to the home page, we see that the system message has changed, so it works. But of course, it might not be the way you want to do it. You want to automate your configuration reload or have it scripted, whatever. There is a so-called Jenkins command line interface. So you just download Jenkins CLI jar, and there is a command to reload JCAS configuration. So you can do it. I downloaded the Jenkins CLI from my Jenkins. And let's change the configuration file again. Let's add more exclamation marks. Very significant changes. I lost it. So if you forget how to run a command, you go back to your Jenkins, and this is how you run a command. And the actual command was reload JCAS configuration. Works. So when you start up your Jenkins with configuration as code, you need to have your configuration file correct. Something use keywords and attributes that are actually possible to be consumed by the plugin. So it's smart to start with a very simple configuration file. But once you have your Jenkins, up and running, you can start experimenting. So I can make a dummy change, and I can say whatever. system message does not really exist, won't be recognized by configuration as code plugin. So if we try to reload it, we'll get a stack trace. But configuration as code plugin always run dry run before applying the configuration. It checks if it can configure. So this configuration element can't be configured. So we get the stack trace, but nothing has changed, and Jenkins is up and running. Also, it is possible to view or download the configuration of your current Jenkins. So you can theoretically go to, you have your Jenkins already working, you install configuration as code plugin on it manually, and then you go to manage Jenkins configuration as code and get the configuration of your Jenkins in a YAML format. But before I said we rely on plugin maintainers to follow some conventions, there will be plugins that are not possible to be configured with configuration as code, and the configuration file here will not be 100% working. So it's something you can again use for inspiration. You can take pieces of that and put it in your configuration file when you build the configuration of your Jenkins. But there is no guarantee that copy paste of the whole file here will give you a working Jenkins. The documentation and JSON schema that are generated are available here. This documentation that I said will be generated based on the documentation for each plugin. It's being improved, and at the beginning it was quite tricky. Now I find it actually easy to use. So if your JCask is new to you, you can always rely on that to find the information, what you can configure, what are the attributes, what are the types, etc. So it's that simple. It worked, yes. And that's it about the demo. And yeah, last part, the open source, how to start contributing and why. So when it comes to why, I think it is actually quite obvious. You learn a lot, and I needed to develop my programming skills and my social skills and project management skills, and it's a nice experience. But also, everyone is using open source. Maybe a risky statement, but I'm pretty sure most of you do. There is a lot of commercial products that were opened lately, and well, Jenkins is open source. So probably you are using some open source, and you don't have to, but it's nice to give back. It requires you, or it required me to leave my comfort zone. Because I'm an introvert, and I enjoy talking to people, but I get tired very quickly, and I feel very uncomfortable with people I don't know. And suddenly I was surrounded by people I don't know and I haven't seen ever. So it's very tricky when you get a comment on your pull request and there is no emoji, and you're used to seeing an emoji that will tell you that this person is happy or not happy. Well, it was challenging, but I believe it did help me grow. But yeah, there are some cool issues to solve. So you can tackle challenges and you have some fun. And I mean, I'm not a person that spends 20 hours in front of the computer every day. But when I'm into something, it's like, what? 5 hours has passed, I need to drink some water or something. So it's really, it can be simply just exciting task to solve and some fun. Expand your network. You end up working with people from potentially all around the world. And it's probably much easier than you think. And I'm saying that because I believed it's difficult and a little bit intimidating. So time for my open source story. The project, the JCask, we started, like at the beginning of the process had to face Koske, and it was like, wow, but he's a normal person, like most of us. So I don't know, I had those fears, and I was terrified and didn't want to face some people, but despite my fears, like people were usually nice. But still, I was surrounded by my colleagues, and when the plugin was more or less released, I mentioned we wanted to have as many plugins supported as possible. So some of the plugins that were not working, we wanted to fix. So I found a plugin that actually my customer was using, so I could get some points at the customer and like learn something. So I went for this Mattermost plugin, and yeah, I created a pull request that was supposed to make Mattermost plugin compliant with JCASC. Very simple change, and actually a lot of plugins will require this very simple change to add some data bound setters for public set methods, and yeah, make sure that the fields in Jelly file have the same identifiers. So, yes. So I fixed it, and I was happy, and people were like, oh, yes, thank you for contributing. And then someone created an issue that cannot change settings in a classic Jenkins. So yes, I made the Mattermost plugin compliant with configuration as code. You could configure it configuration as code, but you couldn't anymore configure it from the UI. And well, it made some people unhappy. So I was, of course, terrified. It was like I was sweating, like, oh my God, I broke it. And then there was a lot of talking and coffee. And like a day or two after that, I created another pull request when I fixed it. And then, yeah, I was very kind of, oh, I broke the plugin. And then I was very apologetic. But suddenly they consider it a small issue. So I'm showing you that it's very simple, and I don't know, maybe lame, but I had a lot of prejudice. I expected being stoned or something, but it's really not that bad. So I don't know. Yeah. It was an interesting experience and this small thing was, boosting my confidence, even if only a little. It's still something. So yeah. Those are the links. So technicalities, how to actually do it. It's a very complicated process. You fork it, you find a way to build it, and you create a PR. And yeah, I'm simplifying a lot. But the process I've seen with the open source projects I managed to be involved with was basically like that. You found the open source repository and you fork it, so you have your own, and that's where you have fun. Then before doing anything, try to find a way to build it. Because there are projects that are very easy to build. There are projects that require, I don't know, to use Maven, and then you need to change some configuration. So make sure you know how to build a project before you actually start introducing changes. Because if you start introducing changes and then you can't build it, you won't know if it's you or you just have the wrong way of building it. And then you create a PR, and then it's taken from there. And there is always some code of conduct. There are always some requirements, how to build issues, how to write the PR, what's required information, and stuff like that. But you'll most probably find it in each project if you decide to join any project. So yeah, if you're looking for an open source project, there is always configuration as code plugin. And I also think that it is quite a common practice. In the configuration as code repository, let's have a look at it. We have issues, and we have some labels that we'll see in a second. Yeah, like good first issue or Hacktoberfest, because yeah, currently Hacktoberfest is happening and a lot of people is joining open source projects. So if you want to do configuration as code, if you want to do any other project, there is a high chance that you'll find GitHub issues, or sometimes it's Jira they use, that are properly labeled, so you know what to do. And there are issues labeled documentation, and it's also very good to start contributing if you don't feel comfortable with coding. Even fixing small typos in a documentation is meaningful. So that's configuration as code plugin. And I mentioned that there is some Markdown file when I was showing you slides that explains what are the actual requirements for plugins to be compatible with configuration as code. So that's the document that describes it. There is a document that explains very briefly implementation of the actual configuration as code plugins, so you can also contribute directly to configuration as code. And yeah, that one. Oops. So still, there is a lot of plugins that are not compatible with configuration as code. And for plugins general issue, for Jenkins, they have a Jira where they report and follow the progress. And on this Jira, it's yeah, you have a link here, so you can check it. Everyone can create an account there. The JCAS compatibility label was added, so if you want to search for a plugin that you can fix, you can have a look there, and you get a list of the issues that this plugin is not working with configuration as code. And as I said, some of them will be super simple changes, some of them will be well, a little bit more challenging. And last but not least, Gitter. So Gitter, I haven't heard about Gitter before joining this project. It's kind of like Slack, but it is connected to a repository in GitHub. And I know if you have a GitHub account, you can just log in to Gitter. Maybe Twitter or something else allows you to do that too, but GitHub for sure. So this is Gitter for Gitter room for configuration as code plugin. And yeah, I mentioned that the communication is happening very lively there. And there are people that like Tim and Joseph, also Oleg, that are basically main maintainers of the plugins now, but there's a lot of other people that join for a second to solve one issue, or they just want to use the plugin and they don't know how to do it. All of those things can be discussed here, and they are usually very helpful. So yeah, there are some examples of how some plugins were fixed, and all the links once again. Yes, so questions. So when you say Java Git Maven project, I need to know specific plugin. Sorry? So configuration as code plugin has nothing to do with jobs. It allows you to configure jobs, but the actual job configuration is provided by either Job DSL plugin or Jenkins pipelines. And so this is out of the scope of the plugin, but I'm pretty sure you can find examples online, because I'm pretty sure Maven will work with there is Maven plugin. So you can easily build Java project that you store in Git and use Maven for builds with Jenkins freestyle job or Jenkins pipelines. This is just not part of what configuration as code is covering. So we have a few minutes left, but I'm not going to force you to ask any questions. I'll be here for a while, so you can, just come and talk to me. And yeah, since nothing is happening, I guess we can finish. So thank you.